Build Your Business listeners. This is Matt Reynolds, your host for the podcast, and you are listening to what we are calling the legacy episodes. And really, these are the pre-episodes that really led to this podcast, the Build Your Business podcast. This is really my life's work and my brother's life's work in building your business. And so they were originally published in the Barbell Logic podcast as part of the Principles or Coaching Success series, but really touch on similar topics to the Build Your Business podcast: how to improve your productivity, how to set and accomplish your goals, deprioritize urgent tasks, to focus on what is most important to you, and most importantly, to become a better person and leader and business owner overall. I'm proud to bring you these podcasts. Again, many years of life's work, several years of podcasts, and several decades of business ownership. Hope you enjoy them and learn from them. You're listening to Barbell Logic,
the podcast where we talk about what it means to experience strength
and how you can use simple, hard, and effective strategies in training and nutrition to improve your life.
It starts with meeting you where you are right now and finding lasting solutions.
Welcome to the show. You're listening to the Barbell Logic podcast. This is another episode of the Coaching Success series. I'm your host, Matt Reynolds. I'm here with a very special guest. Welcome, Jesse Meum. How you doing? It's hard C, right?
Yeah, you nailed it. Executed perfectly.
Perfect.
Happy to be here.
We've been friends long enough. Thank you so much for being on the show. So Jesse Meum, you guys know Jesse. He's been on the show a couple times. I've been on his show. He is the owner, author of YNAB, You Need a Budget, which is a best-selling book and an app that so many people have, even our listeners, our staff, our C-suite, had tremendous value from. And we've developed a friendship over the years. He's been a longtime client of Barbell Logic. The guy's great with budgeting and money,
Yeah.
which is why you're on the show.
Yeah.
So I texted you last week, and because I'm getting this question a lot and we haven't addressed it on the podcast. So first of all, these Friday podcasts are often for kind of up-and-coming coaches. There are certainly people who are already doing this full-time, and this is their professional job. But I get this question a lot. By the way, shout out to Nate Garrison, who will be super excited about this. So Nate is your biggest fan.
I'm Nate's biggest fan. I love Nate. I love his beard.
Dude,
yeah, I just love the guy.
Nate is awesome. He's a great-looking guy. Looks like he's 30, but I think he might be older than us. He loves YNAB. I don't want to put too much on his shoulders if he's listening to this, but it's really... YNAB is almost like a ministry to him, where he coaches people,
God bless his heart,
to help fix their finances. He does it for free, doesn't charge them. I've had guys in my church, guys in my business, and I'm like, look, they're trying to get their finances in order. And he, once you kind of become part of the community in YNAB and you're all in, this is maybe not fair, but it's almost like being part of CrossFit. Like, it doesn't take very long before somebody truly into YNAB is like, have you heard of YNAB?
Right.
YNAB will change your life. And so Andrew, Nikki, our team, like so many people have done this. And so you obviously affected our community in a very positive way. So first off, thank you. And thanks, Nate, for this idea.
Absolutely.
So Nate reached out last week, and it was about the 5th time I've heard this in about 6 weeks. And Nate's working with a guy, and the guy has a solid blue collar job and has done well in that blue collar job, and it pays well. But he has now built out the side business, the side gig, which he's making significantly more money per hour in the side gig.
Oh, nice.
And the question is, when do I leave the main job to just pursue the business ownership side gig that I have? Like, when is it the right time to step away from the safe, I would even say,
Yeah.
into, like, I'm going to push all my chips in the middle of the table and do this. And I text you, we didn't talk. I have no idea what you're going to say.
I have no notes in front of me. Yeah.
You have no idea what I'm going to say. My guess is that we have similar answers to this.
Mm-hmm.
But rather than have our listeners hear me first, I think you are the expert in this field. So I'm sure you've heard this many more times than I have. When somebody says like, hey, I'm building this side business and the business is profitable, I really want to leave my job that is fine and it's not terrible, but I think I would really love doing this side gig full time, and I think I would do that.
Yeah.
What's the wisdom that you give them on the steps to take to move that direction.
Yeah. Maybe I'll tell a story. I'll tell my story.
Let's do it.
And I'm going to speak to the safe thing because you said safe, but you said it in kind of a way. It's like, first of all, I think safe is a total myth, like a safe job, like
Sure.
period. If you own a business, you're the last person to be fired, right?
That's right.
So
you're also the last person to get paid.
That's true too. It cuts both ways.
But you're the last person to get fired.
Yeah. It cuts both ways. So I did accounting in college and I got a master's degree in accounting down at Brigham Young University. And for 3 years, they would indoctrinate us on, you go and work for a big accounting firm, you work your 5 years, you pay your dues, and then you've got it made. You'll jump into industry or whatever. Or you become a partner, you make $250,000 a year or more, you'll be doing great. And Julie and I had 1 kid and then 2 kids during this brainwashing time.
And now, by the way, how many kids?
Now we have 7, and we just got a puppy, Matt. So I don't know what's going on here.
7.5.
Oh, I think 9. I think that puppy is way harder. Anyway.
We got one too this year that we said we never have another dog. We had 2 old dogs and they both 15 and 16 years old. They died within a year of each other. I was like, we're never going to have another dog.
Oh, man.
The neighbor of our pastor, she was like 85 years old. She fell and broke her back and we'll babysit the dog, this little cute Boston Terrier.
No. Yeah.
Well, you know where that turned.
Yeah,
10 days later,
was.
she's like,
yeah.
I just want them to take the dog. And then the family had fallen in love, including me,
Yeah.
all over the dog. So yeah, same.
Anyway, so we got a lot going on. But at that time, life was fairly simple, 2 kids. So I studied for the accounting exam. I passed it all, and I start down at my gig in Texas. And I was making $45,000 a year in 2006, which is doable. It's surprisingly, but it was doable.
Sure.
I had started YNAB in 2004, and I'd been kind of slowly working that side gig, right? And I get to this point where the accounting life in public accounting is brutal. I was working 80 hours a week. I would maybe not have to work Saturday, Sunday, but it was iffy on the Saturday. I'm not seeing my boys. I remember this one time I lashed out at my 2-year-old Porter for doing something that a 2-year-old would do. And Julie, like, mama bared me. She got in my face and was like, you have 1 day with this kid a week and you're going to do that, and I felt so just convicted. It was all from this crazy job.
Yeah, it wasn't about the kid. It was the stress.
I was just tapped. Like it was just awful. In the meantime, YNAB that year of 2006 ended up generating profits, and it was just me, no employees, generating profits of like 90 grand. But I'm making 45 working 80 hours a week.
So you're double on the side gig.
Yeah. 4 to 5 a.m. I'm just trying to make a case for how strong the brainwashing was.
Sure.
Because it's like, well, I can't leave this safe thing. I got this family. So I go to my bishop, like a pastor for us, and he was this successful businessman. And I'm like, he'll know. He'll be able to help me out. And so I do the worst thing. I just contact his secretary at church. I'm like, hey, I want to meet with the pastor. And they're like, yeah, sure. And it's very confidential because you don't know what this young man's going to come to you about,
Sure.
So I walk in. He doesn't really know me. We had just moved there, but he's pretending to be like, hey, Brother Meum, come on in. He's pretending to be like we know each other really well. He sits me down and he says, so what's on your mind? Which is like the opener of all openers of like, just lay it out here, man. What have you done?
Did you kill somebody and bury him in the desert?
Yeah, like we got.
You're like, it ain't that bad.
It's not that bad. But I said the worst starting thing I could have said. It was, I can't believe I did this, but he's pretty somber. And I'm just kind of like going here for business advice. And I said, well, I have this really profitable side business. And he's just like, wait, what? And I think he's thinking marijuana for sure, because at that time it was quite illegal still,
Right.
But I'm like, yeah. And so I just start talking and I'm like, it's this software and I have this guy that moonlights for me and he's doing this. And you can see Bishop Huntsman, you can see his face just like totally light up. Like his whole countenance changed. He's like, oh my gosh, I get to talk about business with this kid.
This guy didn't have an affair. He didn't kill somebody.
Yeah.
He just asked him for some business advice.
This is the wisdom. He's like, okay, yeah, this is all sounding good, but I have 3 questions for you. 1, do you have any debt? And I said, no. And he says, you don't own a house. I said, no, we're just renting. He goes, okay. And he goes, do you have any kids? I said, yeah, just the 2 kids. And he's just like, wait, how old are your kids though? I said 0 and 2. And he was just like, oh, okay. That's still a debt question, right? It's like, what do you have tying you down?
Sure.
And then his 3rd one was, would your wife be on board? Would Julie be on board? And I said, yeah, absolutely. And then he just tells me, Jesse, you have nothing to lose. You can always go get the job.
That's right.
And I never looked back. And then now I just sit here saying, I wish I would have had that year back.
Right.
I could have given YNAB a head start,
Done it earlier.
But the risk that we perceive is so much greater than it actually is. And if you've got enough cushion where you're just like, I could give this a run for 3 months, go for it.
Yep.
Batten down the hatches, go super lean, pretend you're living the way you did 20 years ago or whatever, and just go for it. The worst that happens, you go back to your job, you're like, hey, my side gig didn't work. Any sane boss is going to be like, oh man, I'm so glad to have you back. You're experienced, you know the deal.
If you were a great worker, then you'll just get the job back.
You got nothing to lose. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I love that story. I agree 100% with everything you just said. When I get asked this question a lot of times, the big hurdle I often see, you're working the main job.
Yeah.
You're making 60 grand a year, 65 grand a year, something like that. And you've got the side gig and you're making more money per hour, but less
total
money because it's not as many hours. And what I tell them is I say, live off the main gig and take all the money from the side gig and reinvest it in the business or save the money in the business or pay the debt or whatever, right?
That's exactly what I did. Yeah.
Because the worst thing you can do is make $65,000 from the main gig and $65,000 from the new gig and make 130 grand total, and you raise your standard of living to 130 grand.
It's done for.
And then you got to cut it in half when you leave the main gig. And that's the big deal. So for those of you listening on this podcast, you've got a normal corporate job, you're coaching and you're making good money coaching. Do not increase your standard of living because of the side gig
at all.
Like, just continue to live off the main gig so that when you get to the point, you've got enough, just like you said, debt's paid off, you got enough money in the bank that, like, if this doesn't work well, I have 3 months to be hungry and crush.
You got to give yourself enough time to give it a good go. You can't play pretend on the timeline.
Yeah, you can't go, okay, I'm not getting paid in 2 weeks and I'm not sure if I can buy groceries for the family. You're not ready yet.
Yeah.
Then if you're able to do that and not raise your standard of living, and then again, totally agree. So you've got no debt or low debt. If you're married, absolutely your spouse needs to be on board. That's such a important core value there.
You got to be on board.
Then what do you have to lose?
Yeah.
Then if that's in place, leave the main gig, push as hard as you can on the new one. And just like you said, live like you're the poor college kids you were 10, 20 years ago or 5 years ago, whatever it was. And you'll find that if you do that and you're hungry enough and you're ambitious enough, within a few months, you're making the same amount of money or more in the new gig that you were in the old gig.
In less time.
Because you didn't raise your standard of living from $65,000 to 130 and you didn't have to cut your pay in half, then it's much easier to make that jump.
Yeah. I had totally forgotten that I would literally pretend that profits were 90 grand, retained earnings was 90 grand. It was like, I didn't touch that stuff.
Right.
And what was interesting, a little more of the story, in 2006, I go full time, but then I started kind of doing side gigs. Like YNAB was my main thing, but I had these other side gigs and I was still just kind of had I was dabbling a little bit in this other stuff. It was 5 years before I was just like, you know what? I'm going to focus on YNAB proper and just get serious.
Yep.
But it was another year after that before I took a steady salary from YNAB. So we were, I think, 6 years in. And it was funny. I remember one time I was telling Julie, like, this was probably 8, 9 years in. We're living in a nice house. Things are good. And she's just like, I go, man, the business is just doing great. And she's like, oh, I wouldn't know. Because just like the business does well and you just keep.
The life didn't change.
Yeah, life didn't change. And so we still had a pretty echoey house, not a lot of furniture. Because I would all those chips, I'd put them back in.
Yep.
Only, 2018. So 16 years later did I start to like say, I'm going to pull some money out of the business and start to kind of de-risk a little bit. But it's a long process. But the whole time, you can see that you're doing better. You can see you're making more money. You can see you're getting more efficient. Like, it's so satisfying just to be in that little world. And then if you can just keep your spend reasonable, you got it made. It's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, I totally agree. When you're working the main gig that you want to leave and you're working the side gig, but that's ramping up, it's kind of like you're working 2 shifts.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you're a husband and father, you're working 3 shifts because you get done with, you do first shift 1, shift 2 is coming home and being husband and dad.
Yeah.
And then you turn on shift 3, which might go late into the night. You might get up early in the morning, do a couple hours before you go back to the main gig. You do those things. Well, then when you switch to the thing that you own, there's no scientific evidence behind this, but my experience has been you've got 18 months to 2 years that you can continue to push like 16 hours a day because you own it and you love it.
Yeah.
At some point, you'll burn out. You can't do that many hours, but for a while, you can. And so when you leave the main gig and all of a sudden you're working, 12, 14, 16-hour days at the new gig, it's amazing the amount of work that you can get done. And I've done this really almost twice because I left teaching, same thing, to go to Strong Gym full time.
Mm-hmm.
And, Strong Gym was doing well. And I remember there were several days I can remember making like $2,000 in one day at Strong Gym. Well, $2,000 was the take home pay per month for a teacher in Missouri at the time.
Golly.
And I was like, what am I doing? This
Yeah.
is crazy. Like if I just did this full time, like I may not make $2,000 a day, but I'm like, this is better than public school teaching. So
Yeah.
we did the same thing. We had no debt.
Mortgage aside. Yeah.
We did have a mortgage, but it was a cheap house. It was a newbie house. It was 3-bedroom, 2-bath, siding, just your typical starter home, under $100,000, that kind of thing. So the monthly payment for that was relatively low. We didn't have car debt. We didn't have credit card debt. We didn't have any of that stuff.
Yeah. It's the debt that you want to not have is the stuff that's indicative of spending more than you make.
That's right.
That kind of debt.
It's that rotating debt. It's that credit card. Oh, it's got $11,000 in credit card debt.
It's just accrued.
Get that paid off first before you make the jump. And then you're hungry and you love it and you have pride and it's yours, even if, and you should be, a phenomenal worker wherever you are, even if you have a boss. Like, again, if you do that well and you have to go back to the old job, if you were a great worker, your old boss will accept you, gratefully.
Open arms. Yeah.
That's right. That carries over to the new job. And there's just another level of pride because it's yours. And so you're digging and you're working and you're hungry and you're like, we got to make this work. And if it doesn't work, we're going to lose the house, whatever the thing is.
There's something to be said about that focus, like to have your brain space freed up for that 8 hours, what was your normal gig? Like they overestimate the risk of the situation, but they also underestimate the power of focus.
That's right.
And when your brain is just allowed to focus on that one thing, you will be floored at how much you get done, like in a day, of full-time effort on this little side thing. That was my biggest, regret, whatever, I don't like that word too much, but
yeah, it all turned you into who you are now.
You learn by doing. So
that's right.
But if I could go back, oh man, I just wonder what that year back would have looked like for me.
Yep.
The only thing that I feel like was really helpful was just seeing how bad I hated working for someone else. That was the clarifying thing, or at least working for the guy I did. I shouldn't say it's bad to work for someone else. A lot of people work for me and I hope they wouldn't say that, but
sure.
That situation, just nothing about it was great. And so that did clarify for me, I guess, one, I didn't like it. And two, if I were ever on the flip side of this table, how would I treat people? And I would like to think that that has carried through with how I treat the team at YNAB.
We have very low turnover at Barbell Logic. And we lost an employee years ago that I thought was like this, oh my God, this is going to kill us,
Yeah.
I called my little brother, who's always been a few years ahead of us on business, and he said, it'll be okay. It's always okay, right?
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, he told me this story about this guy that left his business, and it was the same sort of thing. And it was just this massive gut punch, and it was just like, man, we're never going to be okay. And fast forward to today, my brother's business was bought out by a big private equity firm.
Mm-hmm.
And now my brother is partners with that same guy who left his business years ago. And
that's
so
pretty awesome because still,
you don't burn the bridges.
Yeah, they still liked each other. They liked working with each other. He was sad to have him leave. That's such a good story. Like one of our engineers we stole from Apple. He wanted some more balance in his life. We stole him. And then he just got this gig to come back to Apple that he couldn't refuse. And I was like, dude, you got to take it. Like the money was insane.
Take it.
So
Sure.
he does that for a while. And then, I don't know, 3 years later, he comes back. We're like, yes, you can. We were so happy to have him back again.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, a good employee is a good employee, And
that's right.
Yeah. So I just love that. Yeah. You just don't burn those bridges. And you need to also start to recognize, this is getting way ahead, but you got to start recognizing that maybe your business can be a great place for people to develop and learn. And you don't expect everyone to stay. Like,
right.
There's a lot of pride thinking that you could be a good spot as far as like career development and launching for people too. So that's, I've had to kind of grow into that because the first couple, you're just like, oh, what?
They leave and you're like, what did I do wrong?
You left me. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things for us. We've tried to be very generous with equity so that our best employees, our best leadership, they don't act like owners. They are owners.
Yeah.
And that was a big deal for us and a lesson I learned from previous businesses where owners were stingy with that stuff. And I'm like, what if this turns into a big success? What does it matter if I own 78% of the business or 52%? Like, that's not going to matter.
Yeah.
Let's give that away to the best employees so that they don't just feel like owners.
Yeah.
They actually are owners. And so the last thing I want to hit on, then we'll wrap this up because I think it was a really important point that you made, was that the anxiety of the thing is always worse than the actual thing.
Yeah.
Right. And so again, I want to be careful, because if you're not ready and you're sitting there on a bunch of rotating, credit card debt, and you've got a $700 car payment, that stuff needs to be taken care of before you leave. So if that's you, that's not what I'm talking about. But if you're the guy or gal who don't have the debt, you've got very little to lose, you're living below your means, you're living off the main gig, and you're reinvesting all the stuff from the new gig, the anxiety of leaving is always worse than the actual leaving and, making the jump. And so if that's you and you're like, man, I just don't know, then that's a great thing to think about. Are you number one and you've got all that debt and you've still got a lot of stuff you got to take care of? Then take care of it. Live below your means. Again, YNAB, follow some YNAB, and get that stuff paid off. Put your dollars to work. Put yourself in a position so you can make the jump. But if you're in that position, make the jump. Make the jump. The anxiety is so much worse than the actual jump. I'm in the same position, except that I taught for nearly 10 years in the public school system. And I think to myself, what if I had started business 10 years earlier?
Yeah.
Well, again, same thing. Like, those years in the public school system, they taught me, I had to learn how to control a class of junior high kids and speak in front of them. There were a lot of job skills that, while I can look at my degrees that I have in college, and I'm like, I don't really use these as a business owner. There were a lot of skills that were learned. There were also the life lesson of, I don't want to work under these conditions.
Yeah.
And so then when you make the jump, you're like, wow, I can remember the first, and it's funny, I'm not a sports fan at all. It's March now. March Madness is starting to go on. Back in those days, I was a big March Madness fan. And I can remember the first time, I can remember when the opening round of March Madness, that Thursday and Friday, would come out. We would get an email from the school principal or, the assistant superintendent or something, say, hey, just want to remind you that your teachers don't turn on the basketball games in your class.
Yeah.
And I left at Christmas, between the two semesters. And I can remember it was just a couple months later, I was running strong and I turned on the TV and I'm like, I own this gym. I ordered a pizza and watched basketball. And I'm like, and I own and no one can tell me I can't.
No one can tell me I can't watch
And
this.
I remember thinking that was really the first time that it hit that I was like, I don't have to answer to anybody for this. Now, at some point as you grow, now I feel like I answer to my employees, right? Like if we screw this up, like, it's not just me that doesn't make the house payment or the electric. It's they don't make the house payment.
Yeah. You feel like you're getting married a little bit, or at least you should. Like, they're people and they have families and kids. Like, you don't treat that lightly at all.
That's right. That's right. There's a gravity to that and you have to take it serious. They're not numbers on a paper or cells on an Excel spreadsheet. They're humans.
Yeah, absolutely.
With real families.
Yeah.
And so, dude, thank you so much. This has been a great lesson. So again, if that's you, if you're trying to consider making the jump and you want to know where it is, hopefully we've laid this out for you. If you've gotten value from this, we'd love a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. YNAB has a great podcast, great book, great app. Again, been a huge help to us. It's cheap. The cost of YNAB will pay for itself within the first month or two. As you figure out how to put your dollars to work, it's been a tremendous blessing and benefit to our company. So, man, thank you so much for being on the podcast, as always.
Thank you for the kind words. Absolutely. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you, guys. Have a great Friday, and we'll see you next week.